So now that we've had a chance just to kind of play around with some really simple parametric primitives in Cinema 4D and just kind of move them around in space, I want to tune you into a couple of things that you need to pay attention to when it comes to creating content. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to delete all the content that I have in my scene. And I could just select these objects individually and press the delete key. Okay? Or I could actually drag inside my object manager, which creates a temporary marquee, and select multiple objects. In addition to that, I could just click in the viewport and hold down the shift key and select multiple objects as well. I'll hit the delete key to make sure that I get rid of everything. Now, I'm going to reintroduce a cube. And one of the most important things about working in a 3D space is that you move an object according to one axis at a time. Now, there are a few exceptions to that rule. Once we start getting more comfortable with the 3D space, we can start to move content according to two axes at a time. But initially, when we get started modeling things, we want to create our scenes by moving objects in our 3D scene according to one axis. And what I mean by that is that if I have this cube and I want to arrange this cube relative to another shape, or I want to move it in space, in order to move this cube, if I want to move this cube up, I want to make sure that I roll over the up axis or the Y axis and click and drag. And you can tell that no matter how sloppy my mouse is, okay, as my cursor moves around, I'm restricting the motion of that object to the Y axis. I'll Command Z to undo that. I'm going to generate a second object, and I'll just generate a sphere. Now you'll notice that when I create the sphere object, that object appears in the same exact coordinates as the cube object. And the basic principle in Cinema 4D is when we generate objects, for the most part, they're going to be generated at 0 according to the Y, 0 according to the X, and 0 according to Z, which means that the objects show up at the origin of our 3D space. And we can confirm that by selecting any one of these objects and looking down here in the Coordinates Manager. And the Coordinates Manager will show us information about the current position of the object we have selected. It'll give some information about the size and the rotation as well, but we just want to focus on the position. And you can see that the position of this object is currently at 0 according to the X, Y, and Z. Now if I roll my mouse over the Y-axis and I click and drag and I move this object up, you can see that the Y position starts to increase. And I've just moved that object up roughly 123 centimeters along the Y-axis. Now if I roll my mouse back over the Y-axis and I move it up and down, you can see that that value changes pretty dramatically. Now I just moved that object according to one axis. I have the ability to, if I just click on the object and I drag it around, you can see, if you pay attention to the position coordinates, if I were to just grab the object and not restrict its movement to one of these axes, if I just click the object over here and I drag it around, you can see that all three axes are being updated. So I'm moving that object back in space, I'm moving it left and right and up and down. Let me Command Z and undo that. And in fact, let me move this cube back to its original position. So I'll just zero out the Y value, I'll type in 0 and I'll hit return. Or I could press the apply button. Now when I do that, it moves this object back to its origin, or to its original position. Now if I move this cube directly up and I click and I drag on the Y-axis, you can see that I'm only affecting the object according to its Y position. I'll undo that. No matter how precise I am, if I just take this cube and I click and drag and I try to move it straight up, and in the viewport it looks like I'm doing a pretty good job of moving it straight up. When I look at the position coordinates, I can tell that I just moved that object according to three axes at the same time. We want to avoid this at all costs. There's no reason in Cinema 4D that you'll ever want to move an object according to three axes at the same time. And as a result, whenever you move an object, you will always want to grab one of the axes handles and move the object in a very specific direction. Now there is an exception to that rule in that we might want to move things according to two axes, or we want to move something according to a specific plane. And you can see that there are some right angles here, and each of these right angles correspond to an existing plane in Cinema 4D. So in the case of this blue plane, or this blue handle, you can see that it restricts the motion according to the the Y axis or the up axis, and the X, the left and right. So if I roll my mouse over that, I can click and drag that around, and I see that I'm only moving content according to 2 axes. Okay? But for the most part, at this point in Cinema 4D, we only want to move objects according to 1 axis. We also want to use the Object Manager to select content. In this case, what I want to do is, I have a cube and a sphere that exist at the same coordinates in Cinema 4D. And if you have a different setup right now, take a minute and create a cube and a sphere, and just let them sit in the space just as I have them. I'll select the sphere, and I want to move my sphere up so it sits on top of my cube. And the way that I'll do that is I'll grab it according to the y-axis, I'll move that up, and I'm moving that up and I'm paying special attention to the intersection of these 2 shapes. You can see that because I have the sphere selected, okay, I can start to see Cinema 4D is giving me kind of this approximation of how they're overlapping. It's giving me a lot of visual cues here. And I can see that the edge is being hidden. If I roll my mouse over the cube, I can see there's an obvious intersection there. And I'm just going to move that up until I think that the ball is sitting, or excuse me, the sphere is sitting pretty much on top of the cube. And I'm pretty satisfied with that. So my sphere is sitting right on top of my cube. Take a minute and try to set up a very similar situation where you have the cube, and I can confirm that the position has not moved, and I can look at the X, Y, and Z position in the coordinates manager, and I can select the sphere, and I can confirm that I only moved it according to 1 axis, and that was the y-axis. I can confirm that with this position coordinate down here. Take a few minutes and play around with these parametric primitives. Create a couple of different kinds of shapes. Maybe I'll throw in a cone, and I'll take that cone and I'll move it up, and you can see I'm quickly running out of space here. In the next presentation, we'll talk about modifying these shapes and navigating this perspective viewport. But we'll do that in the next presentation.